the century London, historians called it the great cesspool of crime. Even in those days, the streets were not always safe. Danger lurked everywhere. Murder most foul was a commonplace event, and those who ventured forth at night did so at their own risk. Without doubt, the man of the hour was Sherlock Holmes, the world's greatest detective. No clue could escape him. No villain could outsmart him. He and his colleague, Dr. Watson, accepted cases that would boggle the mind of an ordinary investigator. In doing so, these two encountered the most fiendish adversaries imaginable. Among them, the cursed hound of the Baskervilles, the marsh monster, legendary phantom responsible for a series of ghastly murders, the creeper, a homicidal brute who kills his victims by breaking their spines, the venomous Spider-Woman played by actress Gail Sondergaard, and the most dangerous criminal England has ever known, Professor James Moriarty. In film after film, George Zucco and other actors would portray this fascinating character, an evil genius determined to eliminate Holmes and Watson by any method at any cost.
Back from that book. Great Scott! He meant that for you. It doesn't mean it, Watson. Great Scott! He meant that for you. Look out, Watson! Great Scott, Holmes, that was meant for us.
Yes, I'll be over at once.
What's happened, Holmes?
Williams is missing.
Great Scott!
Come on. Watson, old fellow, come along. Here's your coat, Watson.
Oh, what is all this?
Giving Lestrade a hand. Watson, get your hat and coat. Come on, Watson, quick.
Where are we going?
You'll see soon enough. We've not a moment to lose. Come on, Watson. We haven't a moment to lose. Come on, Watson. We haven't a moment to lose. Come on, Watson. There isn't a moment to lose. Watson, there's not a moment to lose.
To a generation of moviegoers, Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce personified the great detective and the good doctor. Tonight, once more, the game is afoot. Holmes and Watson are on the scent, and who knows what dangers await them. Greatest detective is alive and well. A revival of Sherlock Holmes, a play nearly 80 years old, becomes one of Broadway's biggest hits, a sure sign that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's sleuth is destined to remain immortal. Novels and picture books fill the shelves of bookstores from coast to coast. Sherlock Holmes is perhaps the best-known name in English fiction, certainly one of the most recognizable characters in all literature. But why? And why this renewed interest in a figure first popular a century ago? It began in 1939, when 20th Century Fox Studios starts production on an Arthur Conan Doyle epic that would eclipse all that had come before. The Hound of the Baskervilles is launched with a lavish budget and an intelligent script. The ingenious sets include the vast and brooding moors surrounding Baskerville Hall, a technical marvel created entirely on a Hollywood soundstage. The casting is inspired. Basil Rathbone is Sherlock Holmes and Nigel Bruce is Dr. Watson. However, the studio's new leading man, Richard Green, gets billing over them. It's an oversight that will never occur again. The hideous hound provides the thrills, but Rathbone and Bruce cause a sensation. To moviegoers of the day, they are the perfect Holmes and Watson.
That officially closes the case, Sir Henry. And a very interesting case for your annals, Watson. An ordinary dog, an ingenious criminal.
And a more ingenious detective. I owe you a tremendous debt of gratitude.
Mr. Holmes, we've admired you in the past, as does every Englishman. Your record as our greatest detective is known throughout the world. But this, seeing how you work, knowing that there is in England such a man as you, gives us all a sense of safety and security. God bless you, Mr. Holmes.
Thank you, Dr. Mortimer. Thank you. And now, if you don't mind, I've had rather a strenuous day. I think I'll turn in. Good night.
Good night, Mr. Holmes.
Good night, sir. Oh, Watson, the needle.
1942, and Hollywood goes to war. This is hardly the time or the place for a Victorian detective, but Universal Studios has an answer. The new Sherlock Holmes will now fight the Nazis. Moviegoers accept this 50-year updating without question. After all, there's a war on. 221B Baker Street is a safe haven for Sherlock Holmes in these troubled times. His flat at the top of these stairs is a place where he can relax and browse through his books, smoke his pipe, or play his violin. Sharing his quarters and chronicling his exploits is his colleague, companion, and good friend, Dr. John Watson. Occasionally disturbing this tranquility is their long-suffering housekeeper, Mrs. Hudson, delightfully played by veteran actress Mary Gordon.
Come in, Mrs. Hudson.
Oh, excuse me, Mr. Holmes. There's a gentleman, and he's very insistent. Well, I do declare he followed me right up the stairs. Didn't I ask you to wait?
My good woman, you may ask me to wait, but not the British Empire. Mr. Holmes, I must talk to you immediately.
That will be all now, thank you, Mrs. Hudson.
My good woman, indeed.
Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard is a born bungler. As played by Dennis Huey, he becomes a marvelous foil for Holmes. Incredibly slow to grasp clues, he nevertheless has a begrudging admiration for Holmes that he tries desperately to conceal.
Why, if it ain't Mr. Holmes.
Good evening, Lestrade.
Come to give us an hand, have you?
Always happy to help, Inspector.
Thanks, but I don't think I should be needing any. Why, if it isn't Dr. Watson.
Basil Rathbone might have been born to the role of Holmes, and Nigel Bruce, an accomplished character actor, endears audiences with his portrayal of Dr. Watson. A scene stealer of no small accomplishment, Bruce is adored by his fellow actors. The interplay between Rathbone and Bruce is fascinating to watch. Their mutual insults and antagonisms are always tempered by an obvious concern and affection.
Ridiculous waste of time. Think about shutting windows at this hour of the night.
Yeah, you better take this torch.
Well, tell you what, dignified job for a doctor. Dr. Watson, the torchbearer. And what do you propose to do? Sit in a comfortable chair, I suppose, and read a good book.
That's a very good idea.
Yes, very good idea. While I play night watchman, you have a nice read.
Mm-hmm. Good night, have a good time.
Moriarty here, and you let him go? But you must be out of your mind. Why?
Well, he bluffed me into believing that he was holding a friend of mine as hostage.
Friendly or who?
Oh, nobody very important, just a fat, lazy fellow. Medical man, I believe.
Medical man? Do I know him?
Yes, I think you do. A fellow by the name of Watson.
Watson, never heard. Who, me?
I'm afraid so, old fellow. Your street hawker's job was to do away with you in a certain contingency.
And you let Moriarty go? Because of me?
I had no choice. I can't afford to lose you, old fellow. It was your timely warning when you drew our attention to the empty tobacco jar and saved the life of my dear friend and colleague, Dr. John H. Watson.
Nice old woman.
By enabling joining us to continue our long and happy association together.
I'm sorry. I'm sure I would have remembered meeting the great Sherlock Holmes. Please sit down.
Thank you.
The lack of a love interest in Sherlock Holmes's life might have raised a few eyebrows were it not for the fact that women seemed strangely attracted to him. His indifference is attributed to a mysterious romance in his past.
I take it the new issue of the Strand magazine is out, containing another of your slightly lurid tales.
Indeed.
Well, I do hope you've given the woman a soul. She had one, you know.
By the woman, I suppose you mean Irene Adler.
Yes. I shall always remember her as the woman.
Beautiful women glide through Sherlock Holmes's world with alarming regularity. Some seeking his protection, others seeking to destroy him. An expert in the game of cat and mouse, Holmes seems to enjoy these encounters with the opposite sex.
How'd you do?
Oh. Excuse me.
Really, Watson, I've never thought of myself as handsome. That's the first time in my life that a woman has run away at the sight of me.
But hang it all, Holmes, something must be wrong.
Obviously.
Stop it!
Who are you?
My name is Holmes.
Sherlock Holmes?
Yes,
Then you'll help us, won't you, Mr. Holmes? Pat and me.
I'll try to. My name is Holmes, Sherlock Holmes. At your service, madam.
Thank you, Mr. Holmes.
Parfait, allow me to present Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world-famous detective. He's come to rescue you.
Please help me.
Of course, I understand.
I begged him to let me in, but he wouldn't.
Steady, steady.
Mr. Holmes.
Steady, steady.
How can I ever thank you?
If you really must thank me, please do so by singing Dr. Watson's song poem, will you?
You're a darling.
Extraordinary sight.
Elementary, my dear fellow. And very pleasant.
I've been wondering, are you the Dr. Watson?
Well, I'm Dr. Watson of 221B Baker Street.
The one who is associated with Sherlock Holmes?
Well, Holmes and I have been associated on quite a number of cases.
The female is not always the deadlier of the species. Lurking about in nearly every Holmes film is an anonymous assortment of troublemakers. Their sole mission in life is the removal of Sherlock Holmes, and some of them very nearly succeed. Members of the club include Herr Heinrich Hinkle, head of the most insidious international spy ring that ever existed. An insane actor and clever impersonator, Alistair Ransom, better known as the Scarlet Claw. Colonel Sebastian Moran, the most sinister, ruthless, and diabolical henchman of Professor Moriarty. His specialty is spectacular jewel robberies. Finally and ultimately, Professor James Moriarty, the Napoleon of crime, Holmes' archenemy. He is superbly characterized by actors Lionel Atwill and Henry Daniell.
Oh, Professor Moriarty. Won't you sit down? Thank you.
A seemingly indestructible entity, Moriarty is Sherlock's greatest adversary. Their face-to-face encounters are among the most memorable highlights of these films.
And now, Professor Moriarty, what can I do for you? Everything that I have to say to you has already crossed your mind. And my answer has no doubt crossed yours. That's final? What do you think? I shall not rest until you are hanged for the finger murders. A gun? Oh, come now. This is not the Professor Moriarty, the master criminal I once knew. A dock rat could do as much.
You're perfectly conscious, aren't you, Holmes?
I shall be conscious long after you are dead, Moriarty.
Still the same old swaggering, conceited Sherlock Holmes.
And now, Professor, our score is settled. Au revoir until I see you on the gallows. The rope has not been made that'll go around my neck. Come on.
An evil man, Holmes, but what a horrible death.
Better than he deserved.
In his relentless pursuit of Moriarty and his kind, Sherlock Holmes makes frequent use of a peculiar talent. He is a master of makeup, and the more bizarre the disguise, the more he seems to enjoy it. Some of his creations include a drunken Lascar sailor, an elderly German professor, a suave and sinister Hindu, a half-mad old peddler, and the most startling impersonation of all, a second-rate vaudeville song and dance man. Of all his characterizations, this was Basil Rathbone's personal favorite.
Don't just let me be beside the seaside. I'll be beside myself with glee. For there's lots of girls beside. I should like to be beside the seaside, beside the sea.
Sherlock Holmes's keen mind is his greatest weapon. Watson is in constant awe of his partner's remarkable intellect, his incredible powers of observation and deduction, his precise and detailed knowledge of subjects both trivial and profound.
You'll never know that one. But this one? Oh, yes, very good. And definitely Singapore. Right you are, Mr. Holmes. You know your tattoos all right. I'm interested in many things. You know, Mrs. Courtney, people generally forget, in assuming a disguise, that the shape of the ear is an almost infallible means of recognition and identification to the trained eye. He walks with a limp, a left foot, I think. To the trained ear, Sergeant, footsteps have a characteristic rhythm as identifiable as fingerprints. As I thought. Insoluble in alcohol.
Whatever is it?
Well, judging by the stain of my handkerchief and the milky precipitation in alcohol, I should say it was a derivative of the tropicine family. Brunette, young, beautiful.
Well, I'm afraid you're right, but how do you know?
Brunettes. And I pay sufficient credit to your good taste to take the beautiful for granted. The variations in the way Emery's musical box played the tune are different from the variations in the one we have.
You sure?
Quite. You see, I took the trouble to memorize the tune as played by Emery's box that night we were with him in his flat.
Holmes, you amaze me.
Elementary, my dear fellow. Sally reached across, opened the clock, and hid the ritual in here.
Amazing, Holmes.
Elementary, my dear Watson. No, my dear fellow, this is not the work of a homicidal maniac. It's something infinitely more sinister.
You mean the creeps? What on earth are you talking about?
Watson, I'm convinced that these murders are only incidental to some larger and more diabolical scheme. I'm convinced that these disasters are only a prelude, a smokescreen, to cover up a more diabolic plan. We've got to get to the heart of this mystery, and quickly, too. Don't you realize there's a monster at large in the city bent on destruction? We don't know why, we don't know where. But somewhere, at any moment.
Holmes is not only a man of intellect, he's also a man of action. Time and again, he is forced to extend himself physically. His life is constantly in danger. His foes are brutal and cunning. Inevitably, Holmes triumphs, and in each film, audiences savor these final moments when the great detective, relaxed and reflective, comments on the qualities of justice and the future of the empire.
There's an east wind coming all the same. Such a wind has never blew on England yet. It will be cold and bitter, Watson. And a good many of us may wither before its blast. But it's God's own wind nonetheless. And a greener, better, stronger land will lie in the sunshine when the storm is cleared. There's a new spirit abroad in the land. The old days of grab and greed are on their way out. We're beginning to think of what we owe the other fellow, not just what we're compelled to give him. The time's coming, Watson, when we shan't be able to fill our bellies in comfort while other folk go hungry, or sleep in warm beds, while others shiver in the cold. When we shan't be able to kneel and thank God for blessings before our shining altars, while men anywhere are kneeling in either physical or spiritual subjection.
You may be right, Holmes. I hope you are.
And God willing, we'll live to see that day, Watson.
Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce have passed on, but their talents are preserved on film forever. Other actors will succeed them in these roles, but they have large boots to fill. The characters the late Sir Arthur Conan Doyle created are, of course, immortal. For the millions who love them, there can be no end to Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. Vincent Starrett, the Dean of Holmes Scholars, perhaps said it best. They still live for all that love them well, in a romantic chamber of the heart and a nostalgic country of the mind, where it has always